I tell myself it's just my imagination, a trick of the mind, but deep down I know better. My husband, Matthew, has always been a calm, collected person who never let his emotions get the better of him. But lately, he's been different. His silence is heavier, his gaze sharper, as if he's searching for answers he already knows. The tension has been building for days, hanging over our quiet moments. But it all came to a head on what should have been just another night. Everything was as usual. The sound of plates clattering, the warm aroma of dinner filling the air. But underneath it all, there was an indescribable sense of unease. Matthew sat opposite me, his movements precise, his posture rigid. He hardly touched his food, but he wasn't the only one. We were both haunted by an unspoken truth, and I felt it too. Our son, Ethan, was blissfully unaware, excitedly talking about his day at school, his laughter pure and flawless, like a fleeting beam of light cutting to the tension before disappearing into the increasingly dense air. For just a moment, everything returned to normal. And then Matthew spoke. Evelyn, he said my name, and that was all. But the way he said it made me shudder. His voice was steady, but there was something strange behind it. We need to talk, he added. My stomach tightened. There wasn't a hint of tenderness in his tone, not an invitation to idle chatter, but a statement rather than a request. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to nod, to answer affirmatively, to try to appear indifferent, even though the slight tremor in my voice betrayed me. Matthew leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms over his chest, and glanced at me with eyes that flickered briefly with tenderness before becoming firm again. I've been wondering, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, about us, about our family. A nervous smile appeared on his face, fragile as glass, ready to shatter at any moment. I asked a question, although I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. I wasn't sure I wanted an answer, but instead of responding immediately, he reached for the drawer next to him, moving slowly, deliberately. When he held his hand out again, he was holding a manila envelope, which he placed wordlessly on the table between us. At the sight of it, a chill ran up my spine. What is this? I asked in a low voice, my pulse racing. Matthew didn't answer. He opened it. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as they lightly touched the edge of the envelope. It was heavier than I expected, as if carrying the weight of irreversibility. Slowly, almost reluctantly, I pulled out the papers inside. My breath caught in my throat. The paternity test results. The writing was blurry, my vision blurred by the tears that hadn't dried yet. I didn't need to read them. The truth was already there, written all over Matthew's face. Ethan is not my son, is he? Matthew's voice was steady but carried an icy breath I had never heard before. It was a voice of someone who already knew the answer, but still clung to a faint hope that he was wrong. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My breathing was shallow, the sound of my heartbeat deafening in my ears, drowning out everything else. Answer me, Evelyn, he demanded, his tone as sharp as a knife edge. I deserved the truth. Tears blurred my vision and ran down my cheeks. Still, I found no words. How do you explain an unforgivable act? How do you erase the betrayal etched on his face? Matthew, it's not what you think. I whispered, barely audible. He let out a bitter laugh, without humor, and it pierced me like broken glass. It's not what I think? Then explain it to me, Evelyn. Explain it. His hand gestured toward the document I still held in a shaking grip. This is irrefutable evidence. I can no longer escape it. I lowered my head, staring at the pages as if hoping the words would change. But they remained unchanged, ruthlessly tearing apart the world I had done my best to hold together. I made a mistake. I choked, my voice weak. He repeated it, his eyes closed in disbelief. You let me believe that Ethan was my son for 6 years. 6 years, Evelyn. You let me love him, raise him, give him everything I had. And now you're telling me it was a mistake. The pain in his voice was unbearable, and each syllable cut like a knife into my heart. He had lost faith in me. I didn't want it to turn out like this. I pleaded, desperation building in my throat. I thought it didn't matter. His hands clenched into fists, his composure finally breaking with the explosion of emotion. His pent-up feelings were finally beginning to break free. But it matters, Evelyn. He suddenly raised his voice. Things are much more important than you think. A small voice interrupted our quarrel. Mom, Dad, what's wrong? Ethan's innocent eyes darted between us, his little face full of concern. Matthew's expression softened, if only for a moment. When he turned to our son, he said gently, Buddy, go to your room, okay? Mom and I need to talk. Ethan hesitated, his gaze flicking between us, sensing the tension that even a child can't ignore. But after a moment, he nodded and disappeared down the hall. His footsteps faded, leaving us alone in the suffocating silence. Matthew turned back to me, his face rigid once again. I've suspected for some time, he admitted, his voice low but full of something primal. Secret phone calls late at night, pointless trips. But I wanted to believe you. I wanted to trust you. So I put all those suspicions behind me. Matthew, please, I whispered, walking toward him and reaching out to take his hand. No. His tone was firm, resolute. He backed away, not allowing me any closer. You had 6 years to explain, Evelyn. 6 years to tell me the truth. But instead, you lied to me every single day. He reached for the other things on the table, another file, bank statements, and held up our joint account coldly. I've frozen them. My stomach dropped. You can't do this, I exclaimed. Oh, I can, he replied, his voice like ice. I did it. You can't spend any more of my money. Panic washed over me as my carefully constructed world fell apart. Everything I'd been through felt like a heavy weight pressing down on me, like sand slipping through my fingers. As for the man you met, Matthew said, a bitter smile crossing his face. Jack, wasn't it? He gave a shrug, as if nothing had happened. I told his boss everything. The affair, the paternity test results, every detail. He won't be working any time soon. Matthew, please, I begged, my voice hoarse. Don't do this. He shook his head, a mixture of hurt and anger, love and disgust crossing his expression. You did this, Evelyn. Not me. He let out a sharp breath, as if trying to calm himself. You made your choices. Now face the consequences. He pushed his chair back sharply, the sound of it scraping across the floor cutting through the air. When he spoke again, his voice was much softer, but no less devastating. I'm filing for divorce first thing tomorrow. He hesitated, a hint of tenderness flickering across his face. Love, always. Ethan's innocent in all this. But you'll have to fend for yourself.